Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be interviewing a very special guest, my dear brother, Miles Luna, who's a writer, voice actor, and just all-around creative soul. There was an indie project that released about a month and a half ago, I'd say, as of the posting of this video, called Slave Zero X, and my brother found himself to be the lead writer on the project. So I wanted to pick his brain a little bit, ask him some questions about the process of writing for Slave Zero X and just his general writing processes for any project. I think it'll be a cool peek behind the scenes, and who knows, maybe we'll learn something today. But before we jump into the interview portion of the video, let's briefly discuss what Slave Zero X... Oh god, my son is about to throw a baseball at me. Here, give me the ball. Okay, he's backing away. Alright, he threw it over. But before we jump into the interview portion of the video, let's just briefly talk about Slave Zero X itself. So Slave Zero X is a 2.5D hack and slash with fighting game-like combo systems and mechanics. It takes place in a dystopian cyberpunk future and follows our main character as they attempt to overthrow the current regime. It sports a very unique and stylish visual design with 2D pixel character models and a multi-layered 3D background that rotates as you run along the set path. The game is very challenging and requires that you go all in with the mastering of combos, careful positioning, dodges, and perfect parries. You will try and fail many times, but it only takes that one perfect run to push you past the next obstacle and feel a great sense of accomplishment. That said, I think your mileage with this title will vary greatly depending on your skill level. It's not a game that will just allow you to progress in order to see the end credits. You're going to have to earn every inch, and even as I play now, I'm beginning to question whether I'll be able to make it. But even so, I've been treated to some amazing set pieces, over-the-top characters with fantastic voice acting, mind you, and a flexible combat system that rewards you for experimenting and building your own set of combos with the tools given to you. But alright, as we transition into the interview here, I will leave you with one final clip that I think exemplifies what this game does very well, and that is to throw in little twists and turns, little tweaks to the combat so that you're not just fighting the same wave of enemies over and over and over again. In this example, I'm doing that while also dodging sniper fire. And it's really fun how these little tweaks adjust how you approach every scenario, every second of the fight, how aware you have to be of your positioning and the timing of your combos. You'll encounter this stuff throughout the entire playthrough, so if what you're seeing here today looks appealing to you, I definitely encourage you to check it out. Alright guys, so now we are joined by my brother Miles Luna. Miles, thank you so much for being here tonight, of course.
Oh, happy to be here, Dylan. Happy to be here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Before we get into any questions and the actual interview and stuff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for anyone who may not know the legendary Miles Luna.
No.
Give us maybe some projects you've worked on and so on and so forth.
Sure. Hi, I'm Miles. I was a writer and internet clown at Rooster Teeth Productions for like 10 years. I worked on shows like Camp Red vs. Blue and Ruby, as well as some other stuff. And then in 2020, I moved from animation into the video game industry. I went back to school. I took some courses and things, worked on some indies. And as of the recording of this video, I am a writer at Bad Robot Games, working remotely out of Austin, Texas.
And done some voice acting stuff.
And I do a little bit of voice acting stuff. That is true. I sell batteries in England. I'm the voice of the.
I love watching those freaking commercials. It's so weird. I can't look at that pink bunny without being like, "That's my brother. He's selling batteries in England."
Yeah, AA, AAA, we got them all.
Who would have thought you'd be there at some point in your career?
Not anybody. Oh
Okay, but
man.
let's hone in now on the video game that we were talking about tonight, Slave
Yeah.
Zero X.
Oh yeah.
This is one that I was very much been looking forward to. You were kind of like hyping me up on it throughout, your work on the project and everything, and I've had a chance to play it. But we're gonna kind of go through your process as a writer because
Mm.
I think there's a lot of people who don't understand what goes on behind the scenes of game development, myself included. I'm ignorant to a lot of it. So obviously, we're focusing on the writing aspect here. There's so much more that goes into video game development, but I thought this would be fun and educational for the viewers. So
Edutainment.
let's start with before you've even gotten the job.
Yeah.
Just you're sending resumes out to a bunch of different studios,
Yeah.
hoping for bites, right? And you've kind of talked to me before that there is a bit of a preparation process because every studio has their own lineage of games. Every studio has their own style that they shoot for. So as you're presenting your resume and are subsequently hoping for an interview, perhaps get the interview, how are you preparing for that process?
Oh, yeah, no, that's a great question. So, in any industry, I think it's important that you prepare for a job interview. You need to know what you're walking into. You do need to make sure that you feel qualified to do the job. That's rule number one. Don't lie on your resume. Don't lie and be like, oh, I love your games if you've never played a studio's game before. Because guess what? You're probably going to get found out real quick
Yeah.
and make yourself look very foolish. And then immediately people will be like, this dude lies and sucks. When it comes to researching a studio, obviously you want to look at the types of games that the studio has worked on. Is it the kind of games that you play? Is it the kind of games that maybe you enjoy watching? Um, I in the past have applied for jobs, and when I was told I got that first interview, I was like familiar with the games well enough to where I felt comfortable sending in a resume in the first place. And then once I got that first interview, I was like, all right, downloading it. I've got some time this weekend. I'm going to play it. I want to get a feel for it. And that's like if you haven't played, maybe you should. Ideally, you've played these games, you can speak more to them. Obviously, people who apply to work on any Warhammer game, if they already know all of that Warhammer lore, they're probably going to get hired over the person that has never touched Warhammer lore and would need to get caught up. Like
That's
that's
years of
less
work.
then that is years of work. And that's why Warhammer terrifies me. And I respect it from a distance. But yeah, no. And so in the case of Slave Zero, that was done by a team called Poppyworks, published by Ziggurat. And they had a relatively small indie background. They had some cute like Game Boy style games, which I always think is very cool. But for that one, like there wasn't much that I could really look back on. It kind of seemed like a smaller project. And I, at that point in my time, I was sending out resumes to a lot of folks. And when I got the response back, I was like, great. And it was honestly a bit of an atypical situation. Usually what happens is you will hear back. Well, I skipped a step. Most of the time you won't hear back. That's the toughest thing. I think this happens with a lot of industries, but especially the games industry. Hours and hours and hours spent working on writing samples, readjusting your resume to make sure that it is perfectly tailored to exactly what you're applying for. You don't really just want to have a copy paste resume that you send to everybody. Like, take the time, change some words, highlight some things that maybe weren't as important for the last thing you applied to that are more relevant here. And so it takes time.
You said something about writing samples. Do you craft like an entirely new sample for every entry, if you will?
Well, it depends. Most writers have a portfolio website. I have a portfolio website.
Okay. Yeah.
That lists like these are the people that I've worked with before. These are the projects that I've worked on before. And usually it's like, here's a couple of writing samples that anybody browsing by can click on, check them out. It doesn't take a very long time. That is not the place where you want to put your 90-minute feature script. That's not where that belongs. It's
Right.
short things, 5-10 pages max. And so sometimes a studio will ask for specific types of writing samples. Give us samples of barks or character bios, or give us a script that that you wrote that's no more than 10 pages. And then further than that, a lot of places, usually when you've made it a little bit farther into the interview process, we'll send out writing tests. And so writing tests are now, hey, we're going to give you 1 week. Let us know when you're ready. And on that day, we're going to send you an assignment. One that I did was like, give us a scene. It was like a 2-sentence description. 2 people in a sniper's nest. They're having a conversation about this. And then a terrible thing happens and they need to react to it. It can't be more than 3 pages. In that 3 pages, you need to show us who these characters are, what they care about, and like drop this lore item or like this lore chunk. Like, can you do all of that in 3 minutes? Because a lot of writing for games is brevity. Like people, and this is generally speaking, this is not all games, but for the most part, people don't want to sit there reading text or listening to cutscenes. They want to be playing the game. That's why people play games. It's an interactive medium. And so brevity is what everybody looks for. So I did a writing test for one studio, and it was 2 scenes kind of like that, 3-page scenes where I had like a checklist of things I needed to hit. And then it was a 1-page character biography about a character, and there was a few other like boxes that it needed to check. And usually a writing test is something that you can do in like a week. If you are a well-established writer, sometimes it is okay for you to ask for compensation in exchange for your time working on that. But you kind of have to be a big deal if you're going to ask for that. Or if it is like an insanely huge ask, you should ask for compensation, because if they say no, hey, guess what? That's your first red flag. Like a lot of people, I think of interviews as like, I gotta be in my best. Like it's a first date. I gotta like make myself look desirable.
It's a two-way street.
It's a two-way street. Exactly. Like I'm not afraid to say it anymore, because I think the reputation is kind of crushed now after Battlefront 2. Aspire Studios, I applied to work on the Knights of the Old Republic remake several years ago. And they're
it's your fault that got canceled. They needed
I'm
you,
a Sith Master.
They needed you.
Nah, man, it was sketchy. Like they asked for what was easily 2 to 3 weeks worth of work, unpaid. They wanted it done over the holidays. And like their email was like, hey, if you have any questions, email our HR. And so I did, and I got an auto response saying, guess what? HR is on Christmas break. Who'd have thought that? That place turned out to be pretty sketch. And I'm super glad that I said, no, thank you. I'm not going to do this. Because everything else I know about what happened with KOTOR is not good.
It's not dead yet.
No,
it can still make a comeback. Hold out hope.
Sure, I won't rain on your parade.
I need it. But okay, so wow, I've applied for and interviewed for a lot of jobs. That sounds like a whole truckload of work just for the hope of getting into like the deeper interview process. That's pretty nuts. But
as like, just to quickly on that point, like the job that I have now, I think the overall time from interviewing, I think it was a 4-month process for me to go through all of the interviews that I had to do in order to get my current job. And while doing that, I'm still having to, because I don't know if that's going to work out. I still have to be sending out other resumes, working on other things. Like it was a lot. And felt very fortunate to land where I did.
So you get the job. Okay, you've got it. You're hired. Were you the lone writer on Slave Zero?
So in order to answer that question, we need to talk about what writing in games is. So the short answer to your question is technically yes. I was the one person who was specifically hired to write dialogue and story beats and backstory stuff for Slave Zero. That was my one responsibility. However, story and narrative in a game is something that every single department touches. A level designer is affecting story when they make you go through a tight hallway or something. Like that's creating a sense of claustrophobia. That's creating a sense of like, I have no way to go but forward. That is the lighting, the art direction, which is what totally sold me on Slave Zero. I saw the art direction for that game and I was like, I do want to work on
gorgeous. This. Definitely the thing that like pops out immediately upon booting up the game. You're like, holy crap, this is such a cool 2D, 2.5D. I love it.
And to that point, Francine, our art director, who was just one of my favorite people that I have worked with in the games industry, to be clear. It was her first game gig, by the way. Could not believe that when I learned it. By the end of my time there, I pushed for Francine to receive an additional writing credit because she did so much backstory writing just for her art pieces. She made all of these character sketches and all these things, but as a part of her process, she wanted to justify why everything was the way it was and wrote like multi-page long backstory things for a lot of our main characters, for a lot of the environment. And so by the time that I showed up, there was a pretty solid foundation that was already set. So to walk it back again, something that I think everybody should understand is that video games, comparatively speaking, are still a very new art form. Movies and TV have been around for decades and decades and decades. Books,
Let's say, what
live
about books?
theater, like that's got centuries on us, right? And so one of the things that attracted me to the games industry is that from my perspective, it's still sort of the wild west of storytelling. People are still figuring out tricks. Like I think back to early cinematographers and filmmakers, and a lot of them were magicians. They were people who were going, how can I use this technology to do an illusion that will surprise and astound people? They weren't thinking about telling stories. They were thinking about like creating a moment of shock, of mystery, of surprise. And I think you think to like early video games, it's like, it's a pastime. It's going to take your quarters. It's a way to hang out in a bar. And then over time, it's like, well, no, hold on. We can like tell stories with these. And then you take it a step further. You go, no, these are more than just telling stories. These are inviting our players into an emotional experience. And like that is where I feel we're at right now, as we're thinking of these things not as stories, not just as games, but as experiences. And like different studios have different ways of making that happen.
That's a cool way to think about it. Sorry to interrupt. It's like, because when people think of generational leaps, they're always like, oh, 16-bit era to the 3D game era. Oh, like they're always talking about visuals, like, oh, this got more pixels than that does, or that has, so on and so forth. But the evolution of the storytelling in video games has definitely changed a lot.
Yeah,
That's cool.
Game theory is something that I feel continues to grow like every day. I mean, like Vampire Survivors, right? Vampire Survivors came out like a year or two ago. I don't know what time is, but like there had never really quite been a game like Vampire Survivors, and now there's like Vampire Survivors clones everywhere. You got the Deep Rock Galactic Survivor and others that I can't pull out of my brain space right now, but like new ideas form so quickly, and then just like catch fire. Like, I mean, Soulsborne games from Software, like created a genre. It's still, in my opinion, like it's the gold rush right now. And just like in the real life gold rush, there's a lot of people going out there that are, they turn up empty handed because everyone else is rushing out there.
Live service games right now.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like, well, even not even that, but I mean, like, I think it's like at this point, something like 1,000 new games appear on Steam every day. And
yeah,
I don't fact check me on that, but like, you get what I'm saying. It's a very exciting time to be working games. It's also a pretty volatile and uncertain time to be working games. And I've gotten a bit too far off, way too far off from your question. But what I'm trying to say is every single studio does things differently, to the point where a narrative designer at one studio has a completely different set of job responsibilities than a narrative designer at another studio. The industry is still so young. We haven't decided on terminology yet. We haven't decided on workflow yet. Everybody does things differently. And so when I say that, like, I was like the only like person hired to write this game, that's not necessarily commonplace, right? Like that's not going to be the case. Some games are made with no writers. It's the designers are very creative and talented people, and they're good enough to like come up with the story. I mean, Toby Fox, Undertale, that dude did everything. Stardew Valley, like, and those are very rare. Like, I feel like right now people think like I'm going to be the next Toby Fox. I'm going to get into indie game development, and I'm going to make my dream game, and it's going to be great, and everyone's going to love it. I'm going to become a millionaire overnight. And yeah, that can happen. But like, we don't have, 200 Toby Foxes. We have one.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, that's the main point that I want to make, is that every studio has different workflows and does things differently. And what is normal at one studio may be very bizarre at a different studio. And I think that's one thing that like is really important to understand, is there's no definitive way to make games.
Yeah. Well, now I'm going to ask a question out of order. I was going to save this for later, but you're kind of already like
All right.
delving into that territory a little bit. So how much do the different departments overlap? Like when you're writing your story, how often do you go to the voice actors and talk to them, or how often do you go to the game designers to talk to them to get feedback, or like, hey, will this work in this situation, and vice versa?
So again, depends on the place. In the case of Slave Zero, I came on, and as I mentioned, there had already been a good foundation had been laid. We were told like, these are what our characters look like. These are what our levels look like. Here's the overall trajectory of what we're going to do. Here's all the bosses that you're going to fight in what order. Here's all the enemy types that we have. And here's kind of like a rough idea. You start at the bottom of the city and you kill your way to the top. And what we want you to do is to write all the dialogue and like flesh out the characters in the world and stuff where you can. And so in the case of Slave Zero, it wasn't too dissimilar from writing like anime or like, televised shows, where it was like a linear process. It was, there's not like a lot of story choices, excuse me, that you can make in this game. You're on a set path.
Yeah.
And so where you are, that's when this line's going to trigger, and then that line, and then that line. So in that regard, it was a really merciful first game to work on. It wasn't super different. It wasn't like I was diving into writing on Baldur's Gate 3, which, holy cow. In the case of Slave Zero, I did a lot of interaction with other departments very early on. I considered it very important to understand what is the player experience that we are trying to create. There is a guy named Jesse Shell that did a great GDC talk where he talks about the story stack. He's not the guy that coined the term, but essentially it's 5 elements that you want to use to try and build the story of your game. And funnily enough, story is the least important. Story is at the top of the totem pole and is the one that should be able to change the most and should be the most flexible. At the very bottom, the foundation of a game narrative experience is fantasy. So the example that we used with the story stack is, take Spider-Man game, Marvel Spider-Man. The fantasy is, you're going to be Spider-Man. I want to feel like Spider-Man. So then above fantasy is actions. What are the actions? What are the verbs? What are the buttons on your controller that you're going to do that make you feel like Spider-Man? Well, you're going to beat up bad guys. You're going to sling from webs. You're going to swing around. You're going to crawl on walls. You're going to stop criminals. These are the things that Spider-Man does. So then on top of actions, then you have your economy. And this one's kind of weird. Economy is, it's the things that you give the player in order to nudge them into doing the things you want them to do. So economy doesn't necessarily mean like money or experience points. It can. But let's say in the case of Spider-Man, you want to unlock a lot of Spidey's different outfits, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can get those by doing the AR challenges where you're web swinging, or you can get experience points by stopping crimes, which give you the money to buy new outfits or new upgrades or things. So those upgrades, those cosmetics, and even cutscenes and narrative developments, those are rewards.
Yeah,
like
definitely.
You play through a hard level, you get a cutscene, like that was a treat. It gave you more of the story. You unraveled more of the mystery. Those are things that, it's kind of like every person that's played games for a really long time, if you're lost in a level and you find enemies to fight, you go, oh, that's where I need to go. I haven't been there yet. I haven't killed these guys yet.
Yeah.
Like, that's the direction I got to go. This is kind of the same thing. It's like, if I'm getting a cutscene, I know that I'm progressing in the game and I'm doing what the game wants me to do. I'm going that direction.
And it feels good.
Actions,
and you want to do it again.
Fantasy. Yeah. So then on top of economy, you have world. What kind of place are we creating that would have these pieces of the economy where you can do these actions to achieve that fantasy? For Spider-Man, this is a gimme because it's in the comics, but it's like, it's New York City. But let's say you're making a Spider-Man game that for whatever reason, it's a Spider-Verse game. It can't be in New York. It can't be in Ohio. It can't be there. You can't do cool
Could be.
maybe that's maybe I'm boxing myself in. But no, maybe it'd be in like the Pacific Northwest with like the huge redwoods and things. Like you have to think of like, where can all these things happen? And then finally, once you've had all of that, you know the world, you know the economy, you know the actions, you know the fantasy, then you go, okay, cool. What kind of story can I tell with all of that? And so that's like the tool that I use a lot, that I was taught by Susan O'Connor, who's awesome. She was my teacher for a while. That's the story stack. I love the story stack. And so in support of that, when I first started, I wanted to talk to the lead of every department and say, what are the important things about this game to you? What is the experience that we want players to be having second to second, minute to minute, hour to hour? And the best answer I got, unsurprisingly, was from the director. He said, this game looks like a brawler beat 'em up hack and slash game, but it's not. It has the complexity of a fighter. And for players to succeed, they need to learn combos like you would in a fighter. They need to go into training mode and practice those combos. And if they just try to button mash, they're going to get their ass kicked. They need to be like disciplined and learn the rules of the game. And I took that, and from there I developed the main theme of the game, one of them, which is power is nothing without control. Like the first big boss who whoops your ass tells you that to your face. It says, you've got this cool biomecha suit, you're a trained ninja warrior, you got a big sword. That doesn't mean shit, because you're just running in there button mashing. Get good or get out of my face. And so that is just a bell that I wanted to try and ring every now and then throughout the game. It's like, don't get hot-headed, don't get mad, you're going to get frustrated, you're going to make mistakes. Keep it cool, control yourself, and then get back in there.
Well, I can say the game definitely succeeds in that front. I mean, having played, at this point, I probably put in like 6 hours, 7 hours maybe. And yeah, you definitely get the sense that you have to be disciplined and you have to be careful every move, because you mess up one time, you might get juggled into oblivion and it's all over. So when you're writing Slave Zero X, where did you start? Did you start with, obviously you've told us that a lot of the bones were already in place when you got there, but like, what did you want to pick apart first? The characters, the world, the base plot? Where'd you want to go?
For me, it was the characters. The plot wasn't going to change a ton. It was, we're going to fight our way up to the top of the mega city. We're going to kill the calamities that work for the Sovkhan, and then we're going to kill God himself. Like that's the pitch. In that world, which was also a bit pre-established, it is a prequel to Slave Zero to Slave Zero from 1999 on the Dreamcast and PC.
And Slave Zero is such a different game. Slave Zero is such a very odd and strange game. I watched a playthrough and a review of it, in preparation for Slave Zero X, and I was just like, wow, this looks nothing like Slave Zero, like what I'm about to jump into.
I played it. It's like a weird one, man.
Old, chunky, third-person mech shooter, like... Yeah. Very odd.
It's fun. I mean, they do a good job of like establishing scale. Like you do feel big.
Definitely.
Anyways, so I wanted to work on character motivation and character flaws. I feel like if you just have like, I'm Tommy Ninja and I'm gonna fight the bad guys, it's like, sure, that works, but that's not super interesting. And so I think one of the main changes that I suggested that I was like really proud of was, originally the idea was Sho, the protagonist of the game, was the chosen one of the Guardians, and he was being gifted X, the discarded biomecha prototype, to don the suit and fight and save the day and whatever. And I felt as though that was like kind of predictable, seen it before, and also it just didn't really super vibe with the counterculture rebellion that I kind of felt in the game. Like you go through the game killing like fascist cops and like trying to topple a dictatorship, like that's punk rock. That is like anti-establishment. And I felt as though, given that I wanted to do this power is nothing without control storyline, it made sense that I wanted our protagonist to be a rebel within the rebel faction of the Guardians. He is not Mr. Perfect. He's not the chosen one. He has a lot of character flaws and room to grow, so that it's not just like a straight line character arc to the end. I'm always Mr. Good Guy and I'm going to win. It was, I'm starting off, I'm angry at the beginning of the game. Characters are weak, so you feel powerful. You feel like you can just go in and hack and slash because something bad happened to you. You don't know what in the story yet, but you're pissed off. You want to kill these people because you deserve it and they deserve it. But eventually you get to a point where you're kind of told or forced because you keep losing. It's like, hey, it's not just enough. It's not enough to be angry. Like, anger doesn't fix anything. Anger is a great motivator to get you off your ass to do something. But like, if you're mad at how like the recent local election went, about how like something in your town isn't the way you think it should, like you might get mad. You're gonna like get up, you want to do something about it. And then you're faced with the reality that that means like attending city council meetings and going door to door and asking people to vote and stuff that is not cool and sexy. And it's hard to maintain that like fire while you're doing it. And so like, in my opinion, I don't think anger and revenge is enough of a motivator, nor should it be the sole motivator if you're supposed to be the person that's going to save the world. And so that was like, I wanted to focus on character flaws and motivation and see if we could kind of thread some more juicy, messy details across the course of the game.
Yeah, I like that. No spoilers, obviously, but in the as the game begins, you're kind of like the lone wolf, just kind of taking on everybody, and the cast of characters does start to grow as far as like your allies and stuff, and their relationships at first are rocky, and stuff starts to smooth out the further and further you get. So I totally get what the message you're going for there, and yeah, that works for sure. And that's funny how, so who did you talk to? If that was the original plan to be somewhat linear, like I'm the chosen one, who did you talk to be like, what if we did this instead? And like, how did they react to that?
So I pitched it to the three people that I worked most closely with was Francine, our art director, who just came in with a lot of passion for story and character and world. Even though she wasn't necessarily like technically part of the narrative team at the start, that excitement and that she was my favorite person to pitch ideas to because I could tell if they were working or if they weren't. She had a great read on the pulse of this game and what it should be emotionally. And so unofficially, I always bounce stuff off of Francine. Officially, I had to get approval from the director. And for the most part, the director was always like, do it, dude. Go for it, man. The only times it didn't work was if there was like an idea that I almost committed the cardinal sin where I was like, hey, what if we had this like stealth sequence? And he was like, stealth sequences in non-stealth games aren't good. And I was like, you're right.
Shut up.
Lost myself. No. I lost myself there for a second. You're so right.
Back to your corner.
But no, so yeah, the director, Sinak, I believe is what he goes by online. No, most of the time he was like, yeah, man, go for it. And then Rose, our wonderful producer, was just always there to make sure like no ideas were out of scope. It was doable. This wasn't going to change any art assets or things like that. Because yeah, I was brought in fairly late into the game's production, and I also only worked there for 5 months. My contract was 5 months long, so in 5 months I had to go get in there, learn everything, put together a story, edit it down, and get out. Oh, and that's true. We did also have towards the end. We brought in an editor who I feel so bad. His name escapes me right now, but he was awesome to work with. And he kind of helped me once we had a first draft of everything, cut things down, go like, we can tighten up this line here, get this flow going better there. And that was awesome. So yeah, Francine and the editor whose name unfortunately escapes me right now, by the end of the project, were also brought on to help like land that ship.
Nice. Awesome. So favorite thing that you wrote in all of Slave Zero, be it a specific cutscene or a specific character moment or anything about the world, the backstory, the lore?
I really liked Aisha. So they are the only character in the game who is just a civilian. They were not originally in the story, and I pitched Aisha as we knew we kind of wanted like some sort of handler character, but that character wasn't figured out yet. And I thought it was important that the handler not be another member of the Guardians, but that they be a person who represents the everyday person who's going to be affected by this conflict. Like if the Guardians lose, they go back and they retreat and they hide in the hole in their cave system and whatever. But it's the people of the mega city who are going to have to deal with the outcome no matter what it is. And so I felt it was very important to have a character who was like, hey, you just decided to start some shit with the rulers of this city, and now they're pissed, and they're going to take that out on us. So if you're just in it for you, kindly fuck off. But if you're
Right.
actually serious about like doing something meaningful, bigger than you, then maybe we can work together. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with Aisha. And
Would you say she's kind of like the relatable character of the bunch for us, the player?
I don't know if I would say that they're relatable, because they have I gave them a really weird like future slang, because they grow up like poor and literally live in the walls of the city. I made the decision that a lot of their slang is kind of like food or taste based. Like they'll say like that's tasty, because the idea of like eating something good in like they never like they're eating out of dumpsters, right? So like to describe something is like, dude, that's tasty. That means that's the
That's
best,
awesome.
dude. That's
Yeah.
tasty right there. And they're a bit they're kind of like lone wolfy. They have an odd speaking pattern. Ed from Cowboy Bebop was like a big source of inspiration. And I think we did end up dialing their eccentric vocabulary back a little bit. They were a little too weird when they were first introduced. I think maybe weirdly the most relatable character,
Tell me it's the giant
X.
patriotic robot
No.
cyborg.
No, not Thorman. No, it might be X, because even though X is like a biomechanical monster created for killing, I feel like X's journey throughout the game is the most relatable one, because it's just a search for purpose. It's just like being told that you're here for one reason and slowly realizing that you don't have to do or be what people tell you you are. And actually, it's more valuable for you to discover that yourself and to find yourself and what you want. So yeah, the horrible monster meat suit X is, I think, maybe the most relatable.
I can relate to an alien meat suit.
Yeah,
for sure.
Whomst among us can't? God, it's so hot in my office. I realize I'm like sweating. I'm just so nervous to be on the show.
Well, dude, I can definitely see the inspiration from Ed from Cowboy Bebop, and also your comment about the slang shows how like zoomed in you have to get with every little aspect of like dialogue and the culture of the people in this world and stuff. I mean, that's something I would never have thought of in a billion years. But I mean, that just shows why you're on the next level.
Well, no, I mean, it goes
cool.
back to what I said earlier about brevity. You only have so many lines of dialogue, and I'll be the first to say this. Looking back at what I wrote for Slave Zero X, which at this point was 3 years ago, I think I wrote too much. I think there's probably too much dialogue in that game. Especially, this was the tough thing. The narrative department and the design department weren't as aligned as they could have been. It was like, and I mean this in like, I don't say this as a slight, but like that was an indie ass team. That was like 30 people who made something like so impressive for a team of 30 people, but it also meant things were like run and gun, ragtag. We don't have time for lots of meetings. We have to kind of do this. And so there was a lot of instances, like the main points of conflict were feeling like we were in agreement. There's enough room for the scene to play out here. And then some time goes by, and now I'm seeing like the latest version of that level with all the enemies in. And it's like, we're just having conversations over a fight here. This is so busy. There's so much going on. But at this point, we don't have time to change stuff, and we just need to keep moving. And so, yeah, it can get a little tricksy. And I think I did write too much for the game. I'm still like, proud of what I did at the time.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring this up is like, yeah, you only have so many lines to convey a world and a character and motivation. So like working in games has, I think, made me a more responsible writer and a more like kit bashy, scrappy writer, where I'm like, I don't have the luxury of a 22-minute episode. I have 3 minutes to tell you everything about this character. Let's go.
That's awesome. Okay, well, final question then. Final question, and this one's just kind of a goofy one, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
How much of Slave Zero X have you played, and what was your experience? I asked this question for a reason because I kind of know how I already know the answer.
I'm gonna catch so much shit for this answer. I have played the demo for Slave Zero X. I was too busy when the game came out to properly play it, which is a shame because I really want to, but I'm not good at fighting games. In fact, I'd go as far as to say I'm bad at fighting games. And as I mentioned earlier, Slave Zero X, that's a fighter. So I, like, every time we were doing, like, I was testing levels and stuff, I always had to turn on God mode. The farthest, I think I beat the lieutenant with the dog on top of the train once in the entire time that I worked on that game. Because that was like one of the few levels that we had working at the time. A lot of that game was made after I was gone. And so I have not played a lot, but that is nothing on the game and everything on my ability as a fighting gamer guy.
So I think the boss that you're speaking of is like maybe 2.5 hours in the game, maybe 2.
If you're good, yeah. I beat the demo, so I got all the way up to Atavaka, and that felt great. I loved that. Yeah. And that, you know what? I'll an addendum to your question earlier. What was the favorite thing I wrote? The scene of all the calamities on top of the Sector 1 tower was like the scene I think I had the most fun with.
Oh crap! I opened up a window on accident. Oh, sorry. Say that last line again. I missed that.
So to add to my answer earlier, aside from Aisha, I think my second favorite thing that I wrote was the introduction of all of the calamities after your first fight with Atavaka on top of the Sector 1 tower. I just love a gaggle of baddies. That scene was very much inspired by Resident Evil Village's introduction of the lords of the village. And one of my favorite things was when that demo dropped, I would go to Twitch and I would watch people playing Slave Zero X, and every time they got to that scene, they got like excited, and that was just the best feeling ever. I loved that.
Nice. Seeing the fruits of your labor.
Yeah, even though I haven't played the game all the way through, and I probably will never be able to because I'm not very good, I have loved watching people play it on Twitch.
It's a fun game to watch. But we already talked earlier about the visuals, like, just being very unique and cool looking. But then if you throw in like a high level player who knows how to string together combos, it's pretty insane. I watched like a simple like tips or tricks that I think was released by the studio themselves, kind of giving some guidance to the players or whatever. And whoever was playing the game at, the B-roll during that video was a freaking god. And I was just like, wow, that is far and beyond anything that I've done in the game. I didn't even know that kind of stuff was possible.
It was really cool. The week of launch, I was still in, because we did all the work over Discord. It was a fully remote studio. It was fun popping into that old Discord that I still have access to and seeing people sharing videos like, guys, is a link to a tweet like, look at the nasty combo this dude just came up with. And everyone just like emojis, just like, whoa, that was so cool. I hope that person like posts more of their gameplay. It was super exciting, really exciting launch.
They definitely did a good job. It feels like a game where you definitely can create your own combos. Not everything is like laid out for the player. It's experimentation will take you really, really far. But all right, I think, dude, that's all I've got. Slave Zero X, it's out now. It's been out for just over a month on all the major platforms: PS5, PlayStation 4, PC, Xbox One, Xbox Series X,
and Switch,
and S, of course. Switch has not released as of the recording.
Oh God, you're right. It will be coming out on Switch, but you're right. I don't think it's out yet at the time of this.
It's set to release in spring, so it should be like any day now. I only know that really because I'm waiting for the Switch version. I was kind enough to receive kind of like a code for the game, which got me kind of like the early-ish access, I guess the day of launch access. But I do want to own the game, so I'm kind of waiting for that Switch version to drop, and I'll probably play that one. But
add to that beautiful collection behind you.
Oh yeah, I need more red spines. I need more red spines to take over my minuscule 3DS collection. There, they're just getting.
But it's honorable. It's honorable.
They're getting overflown by the Switch cases. But yeah, man, I'm excited to. I've stopped playing Slave Zero X for now, just because I want to wait for that full release, and I'll just dive back into it. But It's a good time, great time. Miles, I think you did a great job for as much as I've played, as much as I have seen of the game. I really enjoy all the narrative beats and the world, the lore, the backstories of the characters. Has been a lot of fun to unravel. So
Well,
I thank you for your efforts.
I'll ignore the obvious bias and say thank you, brother. That's
You're
very
very
sweet
welcome.
of you. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Obvious bias. He's the GOAT. All right. We're out of here. Miles, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me, bro.
I appreciate it. Next time you release a game, we'll have to do it again.
That sounds like a plan, man.
All right. Well, guys, thank you also for joining us. Feel free to like, subscribe, share the video around, and I guess we'll catch you on the next one. Go buy Slave Zero X. Peace.